thank you all for being here in the wonderful city of Milan. Just to give you a little bit of insight, the reason we're in Milan is we had agreed to be part of Expo 2015. So this is a key moment for us because it's the start of our sponsorship of that event, which I think from a European perspective is really key. As a European country, Italy hosts the Expo for the first time in many, many years. So I'd like to introduce the panel. I'm probably going to ask everybody to introduce themselves, but I will introduce my sort of boss, which is, because you do those things, right? This is Rob Lloyd. Rob is the president, runs all of development in Cisco and all of our sales and operations. So Rob, welcome. Thank you for being here.
Nice to be here, Chris.
Klaus, maybe I could ask you to introduce yourself, and again, thank you for being here with us.
Absolutely. Klaus Oestermann. I run cloud networking in Citrix, and it's becoming a rather big part of Citrix business these days. So.
Thank you. Neil?
Yes, I'm Neil Locke from BT. I run our data center portfolio, which we call BT Compute.
And most importantly, host and compare for today.
I am Zeus Kerrevala with ZA Research. I've been an industry analyst for 10 years. I'll be moderating the panel. And just to give you a sense of my background, I'm a former network engineer, and I've probably seen more change in this industry in the last 5 years or so than maybe the previous 30 years before that. So it's been an interesting time for networking.
Okay. And you started when you were 6 years old?
That's right.
So this is an interactive session, but I thought I'd just start because I had the pleasure of spending a week in Davos last week at the World Economic Forum, and I thought I'd share with you just some of the top-of-mind thoughts of all the CEOs, both from the public and the private sector that gathers in Davos, and then just to put that into the context of technology and how the importance of technology has changed and how now it displays itself in the mind of CEOs. And I think it's worth just sort of taking a little bit of a step back and looking at how we've evolved from post the crisis that we had in 2008. And the first thing that I'd say is that you'd probably see that today we have the biggest balance sheets in the history of business. In 2008, we left 2008 with about $1.9 trillion sat on the balance sheets of the top 1,000 companies in the world. By 2012, that had grown to 3.5 trillion of cash sat on balance sheets. The end of 2013, that hit a record $4.4 trillion sat on balance sheets. So the world has a lot of cash. The businesses, the top 1,000 companies, are sat on a lot of cash. And the theme, realistically, around Davos this year, which was very optimistic compared with maybe many other years, is that every single company is looking to drive growth. Growth is the number one thing on the agenda. Historically, over the last few years, it's been a little bit about cost control. It's been about hunkering down because of the post-crisis situation. But now every single business across every single vertical is really focused on growth. And to look at how they grow their organizations and grow their businesses, they're really looking for something different from IT. They're looking for IT that helps them drive the number one thing for them, which is innovation, because they fundamentally believe that their growth for the future will come from their ability to innovate. One of the interesting surveys for me, which was by PwC, which asked again about 500 CEOs, what is important for you in terms of IT? And what's important for you in terms of how you're going to drive your businesses? The interesting thing for me that 86% of them said, we are going to re-look at our whole research and development organization. 86% of CEOs said that. We need more innovation from that spend that we have on R&D. 88% said, we have this huge amount of data in our business, which is highly valuable, but we're not leveraging it in our business. And we know that we will need to leverage that information in a very, very different way in the future. So the opportunity that big data presents itself, again, both in the public and the private sector. And then finally, 90% of those CEOs said, we now have to drive innovation at unprecedented levels in order for us to grow our business. And we're looking at IT in a very different way because we fundamentally believe that we spend a huge amount of money on IT, but we want it to do different things for us in the future. We want it to be able to drive business velocity at a far different pace. Every single company that we met, regardless of whether they made automotive parts, whether they were a company in the retail space, every one of them said, we must become a software company. We have to be able to leverage the power of technology in order to change the way we monetize and the delivery of our products, how we interface to our consumers, how we interface in a business-to-business environment. And that, I think, is very, very different because that is on the mind of CEOs. They now know that they must prepare their businesses for the next evolution of their companies and for the next opportunity of growth. So I think that when they look at IT, they're looking at it in a very different way. They're looking at it, how do we do more with IT? How do we make it faster? How do we make it more pervasive? How do we use it, not to drive technology for technology's sake, but how do we drive it to ensure that we have business outcomes? And I think this is where the advent of the cloud comes in, because the cloud is about providing a business outcome. But I think they all recognize that it's not just about having a cloud that's on an island. It has to be interconnected. It has to be interconnected with the public cloud services. They have to be able to deploy very quickly. As they launch new products, they want to be able to have that launch pervasive across all of their industry, all of their customer bases. And as a consequence, they're asking for more. I then think that they also see the power of the pervasiveness of devices. The mobile devices that we know now are at the billion in terms of devices on the planet. And we now need to understand how do we leverage that and how do businesses leverage that in order to be more successful in the future. So this move to cloud, this move to mobility is driven from a common agenda, which is how do we drive growth and how do we drive growth through innovation. So IT is going to play such a much more important part in terms of how they grow their organizations. But they're looking for IT to be very different, to deliver more value, to deliver a more outcome-based service to the business. And to that end, I think that what Rob talked about in his keynote today really talks to how do we, as a company, how does Cisco provide that along with our partners? How do we provide that interconnectivity? How do we provide that outcome-based delivery of applications pervasive across mobile devices, across fixed devices? And then how do we move that into this thing called the Internet of Everything? Because the Internet of Everything, again, in Davos, I think it took on a completely new era. It is seen by every single business as being a very, very key opportunity. We heard it from the automobile manufacturers. We heard it from suppliers to that industry. We heard it from companies such as Philips. And many of you will have seen some of the things that Philips are trying to do. But I'll just give you a couple of examples. They are providing lighting systems where every single light has an IP address. Every single light bulb has an IP address. They're doing that because they know that what they'll have to provide in the future is not light bulbs. They'll have to provide contracted light. They will have to provide to a city a contracted light system for the city or to a building. And they're doing that today. And they want to be able to do that because they want to be able to change the way in which they interface with their customer base. And as a consequence of that, they want to be able to control every light bulb. And they want to be able to deliver the light with the lowest cost, with the lowest use of energy. The second thing that they're doing, which is, probably to all of us seems, space age, is that every toothbrush that they want to make in the future will have an IP address. It will have a wireless connection, every single toothbrush. So they see that everything that they make as a company will embrace the opportunity that the Internet of Things provides. So we are, I believe, we're entering a very different era of IT. It's not just about what the Internet has provided historically. It's about the next generation of the Internet, where every single device over time will be connected. And that's what we're trying to prepare for as a company. A very different scale of IT, a scale that we've never really seen before in the IT industry. So Rob, in your presentation, you talked a lot about how we're going to make that a little bit easier, how we're going to provide some of the the technology that supports that, huge increases the number of connected devices, both mobile and fixed. Maybe just give a couple of thoughts.
Very high level, Chris, is applications are where technology invokes business process and logic, how businesses run. That's done in applications. We think that we need to abstract a clear way to have applications dynamically invoke infrastructure, the other amount of technology that delivers that, wireless access points and routers and switches. And basically the simple premise is if we can take the business logic of business process, abstract how infrastructure can be deployed, including security and other characteristics, make it simple to do that through software, that's our strategy. And leveraging the end-to-end nature of the intelligence we built into the network is a direction for us. It's a journey. So in my presentation today, you still saw brands inside those squares. Those brands will go away as we just go more to a licensing mechanism. But for our own team and for our partners, describing those brands is the way to describe the functionality. But effectively, sub-brands in terms of our products and software that we've delivered will be consumed in the middle by just one brand, which is a Cisco One platform. One stands for Open Network Environment, and I think the shift for Cisco in the last year is to be much more open, embracing APIs and interfaces to third-party software, and embedding or abstracting much of the intelligence from our network and making that available through APIs. So that's a high-level premise. I know that the panelists are expert in certain areas of that, and maybe we can turn it to Zeus and he can get the conversation going.
So when I listened to you, Chris, and your keynote this morning, Rob, there's really 4 themes I took away from that, and we'll touch on each one of those. And I think the first one is really, the complexity of IT today. And as a former, I read in the media how IT's falling behind and they can't keep up with the business. And frankly, as a former IT guy, I take a little offense to that. I think IT, I talked to Neil a bit back there, they're smarter than ever. He's a really smart guy. So it's unlikely IT's falling behind. I think what's happened over the years, though, is, as you guys talked about, businesses do want to move faster. They do want to be more agile. They do want to respond to competitive pressures faster. And what we've done is we've introduced a whole host of new technologies that allow us to do this, right? So we have virtual platforms, cloud platforms, we have wireless devices, we're bringing in consumer devices, we're pushing things to the cloud, we're bringing them back on premise, we're making them hybrid, we're making them converged. And frankly, all of that has made the environment much more complicated than it used to be. When we used to deploy things in silos, sure they were inefficient, but they were pretty easy to manage because you just threw up a whole rack of stuff for one app and you replicated that rack, for app 2 and replicated that for app 3, and now we're trying to drive greater resource efficiency. And I think we're at a point now where IT just isn't scalable. And just from my own research, some of the data points that I've been managed to collect is, I'm sure this doesn't surprise you or you guys, but about 83% of a company's budget now today is used just to maintain the current operating environment, which means there's very little left for strategic initiatives. And I don't think anybody became an IT individual to just run the stuff that's in the business today and do that forever. Also, 3/4 of problems are identified by the users now, not the IT department. That means the visibility that organizations have isn't really sufficient to be able to understand how these things move around between these hybrid and conversion environments. And lastly, the largest cause of downtime actually is by IT. It's from human errors and configuration errors. So in a sense, we're using up all our budget and we're creating our own errors and we can't find them very fast, and it's created an environment that I think isn't really scalable. And frankly, if something doesn't change, I think IT is going to be in a position where they're just not able to keep up anymore. And Neil, I'll start with you. You mentioned that you're in the data center for BT. And,
Yep.
How different is the environment today than what you said even a few years ago, and how are you combating that?
Well, I think from BT, it's about service provision. That's what customers want when they deploy applications or they deploy infrastructure. They just want to make sure it works. And I think what we've been seeing is we've almost seen 2-tier IT, where all of the innovation's happening on cloud, where it's flexible and easy to develop and great to write to and create new things. But to your point, you've still got the 83% of what you're doing that's running your business today, and getting that shift across where you can open up that 83% to what the cloud can bring is really, really fundamental. And the work and what Rob was describing today with Intercloud, that's why we're involved. It's absolutely why we're involved, because we want to be able to make those private clouds that have been deployed in customers' data centers where they've got so far with it and not being able to get it to the next level, open up the innovation, actually connect those to BT's clouds and others that Rob described, and actually make that available to people. That is going to free up people's time. We know it is. Being able to find a really simple, seamless way to pick up workloads and deploy them in different ways. That's what innovation's about. That's why we've deployed our cloud the way we have, distributed around the world, because actually customers don't want everything in one data center anymore. They want the data distributed around the world. The users are somewhere else around the world. So you've got to be able to connect these things together and make it seamless. So if you can open up that 83% using your statistic, then I think we've got a great way of actually opening up the IT resources to be innovative. Otherwise, they'll just keep doing the 83%, and we'll have two tiers.
Thanks, Lloyd. Thanks. Klaus, do you have any comments on that and how you drive some of that complexity out?
Yeah, I think automation is going to be key in doing this. And what we've seen, whether it's enterprise customers, our cloud partners, our .com customers, or our telco customers, they're all kind of wrestling with how to implement more automation and really get telemetry all the way down to the smallest device and collect all of that. So we've spent an enormous amount of time in our products really instrumenting things and making all that available, oftentimes through Insight, we call that, so NetScaler Insight and so forth. And we're now connecting that through a great partnership with Cisco so that it's available on a much broader basis through APIC that was announced today. We've been working in the last couple of years on really how to set this up with each one of the product lines, but now I think with APIC it's going to become a lot easier to automate these things and instrument these things across the board. So we believe that customers are really asking for this aspect, and automation will lead to freeing up more of that time we're talking about that's just being used to very trivial things, freeing up budget, and basically being able to get alerts ahead of time, get alerts and correct things so you have learning systems instead of, you've got to have an error detection and then you've got to go fix it. So I think building really smart systems that can be autocorrective is going to be.
You're talking about moving IT away from this reactive model and more to a predictive model.
Absolutely.
Right, where you can almost troubleshoot the problem before it happens.
Mm-hmm.
Right? That would be obviously the holy grail in some ways. Rob, you talked a little bit about programmability in your keynote. What's really the role of programmability in this, and what are some things that IT people should be thinking about when they look at all these different platforms that claim to be programmable?
Well, programmability is typically of hardware, of a device. Our hardware platforms, our systems platforms, have inherently been developed with specialized technology which allows for programs to run in them, and actually aspects of software that run in hardware faster, often at scale, need to run in hardware. So think of an analogy. Why did we have mid-range systems, and why did we have mainframes, and why do we have some things that at scale embedded software in the hardware? Was to get performance and resilience that you can't do just at the software layer. So programmable infrastructure is about scale. So if you were in our business, you'd recognize that certain routing tables and certain amounts of information that changes instantly, better to have that information sitting in a hardware table than to try to rewrite it over and over again, which is what some of the SDN constructs are talking about today. Constantly rewriting all this information at a software layer won't get the performance and scale that you would need in a cloud infrastructure. So programmability is about giving access to the underlying infrastructure. And in this case, going forward, much more through a consistent set of programmable interfaces, APIs, that can be presented and utilized as an abstraction layer. So I can use the APIs. We've demonstrated the power of APIs, Chris, with what we did with UCS, where we created a nice little API layer, and BT recognizes that. Hey, that's nice. You can use the power of the underlying infrastructure in a much simpler way. We're working with Citrix in using some of their APIs and our APIs connecting to take advantage of their automation and orchestration software, which is developed on an enhanced version of OpenStack technology. And basically, it's making these pieces link together. So programmability to Cisco means creating easy links through the software stack so that we don't need as many pieces of middleware handing off and handing off and handing off. That's created amazing complexity. Yeah. And the network typically was a closed system, opening that up, and then having programmable events that simply can be pushed to hardware, I think, is Cisco's direction.
Well, in a way, the network's always been somewhat programmable. In fact, when I was an engineer, we used to write our own Visual Basic scripts to be able to go into the router. Right? Now, the problem there was that you needed an extremely high level of network knowledge and technical competency to be able to do that. And I think one of the differences that I've seen is that the API structure you've created lowers that bar tremendously, where you don't have to be a Cisco certified engineer to be able to actually create a script or something for a product. Correct. And while Klaus there is a pretty technical guy, I know a lot of Citrix engineers, for instance, are not, right? They don't. But the fact that now you and your company can now interface with one another through a much more standardized set of programmable interfaces, ones that app owners understand, I think is really a big key.
So the big announcement today was much of what happens in networks today. The people that are here at Cisco Live, the years of experience you had as a networking engineer before you entered into the consulting business, is done through what we call command line interface, CLI. It's a method of programming the infrastructure. Yeah. It's a manual method. It takes experts to do that.
Very cryptic.
Yeah. It's a language that only certain people understand, and they program the underlying infrastructure through something called CLI, command line interface. APIs changes that, so you can actually use a higher level management system to then invoke that capability. That's one big change. The other big change is, I'm not sure if you all know what an access control list is. An ACL is how policy and security is deployed across a broad set of branches or connection points. You probably know what an ACL is.
Yep.
Most enterprises today use access control lists to invoke policy across their wide area so that they can actually maintain a secure VPN. That's how most enterprises run their business. Access control lists are programmed manually. And when one programmer leaves and another starts, no one knows what to do with that old ACL. So we need to automate that whole process. And the Cisco One platform will give us a capability to not manually be deploying ACLs, but bind that policy to the actual application. When the application stops, the policy doesn't have to run anymore. That's a fundamental change in terms of the complexity that exists in the overall networking world, where when I ask a customer, how many ACLs do they have in their network? I won't ask you that question. They say, we don't know, because they don't know. They could have hundreds, more likely thousands, of these ACLs, and what we want to do is to create that same construct but map it to the application. So when SAP is running, it needs this security policy. When Microsoft Exchange is running, it needs this policy. When you don't run the application, remove that policy and don't burden the overall infrastructure with things that it may not need. That's a fundamental change in the underlying deployment of networks. And those two things, I think, in this audience at Cisco Live are big changes. So we're bringing up certifications and training to help them look at that.
All right,
Does that make sense to you?
Yeah, it does. I mean, I'd take it another level on, because we've been using this. We've been using what Cisco have been doing with NetApp around FlexPod, and the collaboration with Citrix around the automation platforms. That's in our cloud compute service. And for me, that's meant I've been able to offer a service quality to a customer. So if they want compute at a typically really high performance, we can do that because we can use these programming interfaces to make that happen. And then when that workload is finished, it gets released back to the pool. Yep. But the important thing about that workload, it understands what the application needs. So if it needs really fast servers and really fast storage and really fast networking, the APIs can bring all that together and make that available to the end user to do their innovation and their application, and then take it away again. If it doesn't need that, it doesn't have to deliver it. And that's what's really cool. That's the API abstraction for me.
Yeah, and so before I leave the complexity team, I just want to talk about the impact, I think, of what you announced will have. You know, prior to, if you want to think of a good analogy, when the web was first, coming around, the only way you could create a website was to program in what's known as raw HTML. And if you actually go to a website and you do a view source, you'll see all the cryptic code that it takes to create a web page. And it would take you months just to do, like, a couple of simple pages. And then all of a sudden, these graphical interfaces came around that allowed, it just completely exploded, right, the number of web developers, and you can see the impact that it's had. And I think the simplification of being able to tap into network data, pull it into applications, do analytics, things like that, be able to make rapid changes, I think you're going to see the entire world of networking change. And really, it's needed now. If we are truly going to move into this Internet of Things where we're connecting everything in our lives, right, then simplification has to be a big part of that. And I think that is I think the impact of what Cisco announced today, I think, will be realized, a few years down the road when we see it come to fruition.
So if you keep that analogy, Zeus, and just go one step further, once we got graphical user interfaces in programming those pages, we now have templates. So you can go on right now online, pick a number of website templates. The construct of ACI, application profiles, will look exactly like those templates. So you'll create a template for how Microsoft Exchange runs. It'll be pre-done by experts who understand the complexity, and then our customers will be able to choose from a library of application profile templates, just as they go to GoDaddy and choose from a library of web templates. And that's going to fundamentally change how all that underlying complexity is presented. So the early days of application-centric infrastructure will be building those templates, that logic, with partners like this. That logic then turns into a complete game changer in terms of how users will deploy that technology. And that's the next year. That's just starting now. And that's very exciting.
I think one of the things you said in the keynote, which was actually it builds in the security and compliance with it as well. So it actually understands that if you can't deploy it somewhere, because maybe you're not allowed to store data in that location, or you're not allowed to move data, or you're not allowed to have service there, it understands that as well. And that's a really, really important part of that templating approach, because that makes it work.
So thanks. Except GoDaddy has Danica Patrick doing their ads, and you have Neil.
Just as an example, templates. They sell their marketing is pre-done templates. That's how they market, templates.
I want to transition to another theme that you talked about, which was applications, right? And it's true that apps drive this business and run our businesses, but the whole world of applications is changing, right? And particularly on the mobile side, you have a lot of smaller, lightweight. I don't want to call them throwaway applications like in the consumer space, but certainly apps that are designed to solve one specific problem or pull one piece of data. And I think that's also added to the complexity. And Klaus, I'll ask you. It's not just the volume of apps that's changed, but the whole nature of applications have changed, hasn't it?
Absolutely. I mean, if you look back, apps were sitting right next to servers. Those kind of legacy apps, right? If you look at today's apps, whether it's consumer apps, leveraging HTML5, apps leveraging Internet of Everything, picking up signals and so forth. It's a whole different way of building apps today, and the complexity of what you need to register and react to and so forth is very, very different. The app infrastructure, whether it's in a data center, in a cloud, is vastly different from where it came in the past. So I think that brings around a layer of complexity that you didn't have yesterday that you got to deal with as well from an app standpoint. And that's part of what we're expert in with our layer 4 through 7 capabilities, and how do you protect that, how do you build that up, and how do you, again, from a networking infrastructure, make a setup so that what goes on in the app is translated into the network, and you can react to these in real time.
Yeah, and in fact, I think applications themselves have become more network-centric, right? And maybe that's an easy thing to say because I'm at a networking event. But if you look across the landscape, companies like Oracle and Microsoft have made significant investments in the network itself. Even Google has, and it's because these apps are more network-centric. And how's that change things over at BT and the way you try and provision things to customers?
Well, I think they just expect it distributed. So that's why with our cloud compute service, we have nodes all around the world. That's why we're actually using our global network nodes in 170 countries to actually connect into the data centers so you can actually make those apps get delivered where they want, whether that be for performance perspective, or they need to distribute data, or they need to do it from a regulatory or compliant perspective. There'll be all sorts of complexity in there as to how the network needs to support them actually get those apps where they're actually needed to be delivered, which is where the users are.
Yeah, I just, one comment on that. I think when we think about apps, we always think of the context of a consumer app, an app we would see on our iPhone or device. The reality is that there'll be more and more applications which are machine to machine, and those applications, we won't see them, but they'll be controlling environments. They'll be doing many things that today is done manually, and it's that machine-to-machine app environment as well that you also have to cater for. So that there becomes, in a large enterprise, an abundance of applications. Some you see, some you don't. They're embedded today in systems. They're embedded in manufacturing systems, which are completely autonomous to the network. The difference is that moving forward, everything will be on the IP network, whether it's the manufacturing process, whether it's environmental, whether it's about power management. Everything moves to the IP network. And therefore, there will be a large plethora of applications which are a machine-to-machine, which then need to be managed in this new environment. And that's one of the key changes that you'll see as the Internet of Everything starts to become commonplace across the world's enterprises. They will do this. This is not a question of if they will do it. It's simply a case of when. They'll do it because they have to be able to drive innovation at unprecedented rates. So I think, from the network perspective, it has to play a very different role because it now has to amalgamate services that were delivered completely autonomously historically. They now have to be delivered across one IP network. You see this in particular in the manufacturing world. The manufacturing world that had a completely separate network now is being integrated fully into the IP network because it wants to take advantage of all these applications that are providing it information. And it's a very different, therefore, environment because then you add all the complexity that was talked about and then this pervasive security which now has to be applied to this environment.
Yeah, towards the end of last year, in fact, the industry held its first Internet of Things World Forum, and I was lucky enough to go to that. And the one common...
And it was held where?
In Barcelona, right? And in fact, the city of Barcelona did a fantastic job showcasing all the connected lights, parking meters, trash cans, everything. But as I walked around the expo floor there and talked to the vendors, the one thing that came up over and over was this concept of analytics, right? App vendors today want to make their apps smarter and more predictive. And if they know who a person is, what direction they're traveling in, where they are, what they're trying to do, and trying to get a lot more information under the network, they can now make their apps smarter, more predictive, and frankly, more valuable to their customers. And so if you're in motion, what you'll see is different than if you're in a store, which is different than what you'll see if you're at home. And it's a pretty fascinating field to look at. But clearly, this concept of analytics is only as valuable as the data that's available to them. And I think the network plays a pretty important role in that. So Rob, another theme that we heard in your keynote was this concept of fast IT. And I don't know if you just want to maybe give everybody just a quick 3-minute overview of what Cisco means when it talks about fast IT.
It means dealing with the complexity that everyone's dealing with, considering security, governance, compliance, the new apps, the existing infrastructure, something different to move faster to stay up with the pace of the business. Because the CEOs are recognizing growth and innovation is their agenda, and they're turning and seeing IT that's struggling to keep up. So the new rules are, can we streamline and simplify the interaction between applications and infrastructure? We think we can. We made some announcements about the automation of that, APIs, the Cisco One platform. Fast IT, quite frankly, Zeus, is mapping application development and deployment in an increasingly mobile world with the underlying infrastructure by keeping governance, security, policy, data sovereignty, which is on everyone's mind, managing all of that the way we're doing it just doesn't scale. So we're looking to be one of the strategic partners to our end users and to the providers of those capabilities to make that happen. And that's the strategy of Cisco in the next years ahead, is to simplify IT by opening up programmability and providing control to the user of accessing the richness of what they've installed. Remember, we have $180 billion of infrastructure that our customers have deployed, with many of the features I described are already in those products. We're going to expose more capabilities from the existing technologies that our customers have deployed, and I think we're going to help them pick up the pace of deploying applications.
Right. Do we have time for one more?
Yeah, I was going to say 5 more minutes if you could open up to the meeting.
Oh, yeah, okay. All right. So are there any questions from the audience? We have one here.
Yes, Jennifer Scott from Companies Weekly in the UK. Obviously talking about automation and also making it easier for network engineers to do these things. You're saying it will mean that there's more chance for these people to work on innovation, but isn't the reality that it's just going to have an effect on the number of jobs, and companies will take the opportunity to hire less skilled people, cut pay perhaps, or just hire less people in general to save money?
I mean, I can take that. I mean, I think that, what I heard was that every single company now understands that they have to have IT capabilities which are fundamental to their competitiveness in any industry that they work in. So I think that what they're looking at, what is expensive assets, the people that work in the IT organizations, they want to remove the mundane element of what they do, and they want these people to be driving and helping use IT to really promote products and promote services in a very different way than they have historically. Because they know this world is becoming ultra competitive. They know that in every single market there's a new entrant, and that new entrant has the agility on its side. They know that as big enterprises, they have to move a lot faster than they did before. So, I am sure there are, on occasions, the people will think, in the way in which you describe. But I honestly believe that the enterprises understand fundamentally they have to make IT and provision IT much easier to use and much faster than they have done historically. So my belief is that those people will be utilized to try and help companies drive growth.
I think that's an important point. Who do you write for? So the readers are primarily IT people, right?
Yes.
And I think this is a very important point for the industry, because if you look historically, as we've gone through these evolutionary changes from mainframe to client server to internet computing, there was always this threat of IT jobs going away, and what happened was the job of the IT individual changed, right? And if you look, the role of the future IT person is going to be about trying to link business value to IT value, and being somebody who develops schemas and policies and things like that. And some may be adverse to that change. Just like I know a bunch of guys that used to run mainframes that were adverse to change, and they don't have jobs anymore, okay? So I think IT, as business evolves and becomes more IT-centric, the skills have to change along with it. And I think it's a very, very important point for your customer and your customer, Klaus, and all the people that work for you to understand this and want to evolve along with it.
But here's the net-net. A year ago, we started to develop the certification and training programs. These people here at Cisco Live are here to recertify and retrain and re-establish their capabilities in complex areas of what we do in networking. We've got certifications for application-centric infrastructure engineers, software-defined elements of our program. We've seen this over 30 years of continuing to develop the curricula. Through our training partners, there's 3 million training sessions we deliver every year for this community. And quite frankly, that curricula has already evolved. You'll see it in the announcements we make here, because the people here quest for that next level of leadership. They've always been in the leading pole position, and we're re-upping that in certifications that will be all about what we've talked about, so they can lead again.
In fact, it's always opened up more jobs, just different jobs.
Yeah, these will be different jobs than the network person doing command line interface to someone orchestrating applications and how they can be deployed. Very much more impactful, but hard and exciting at the same time.
Other questions? Yeah.
All of you talk about the Internet of Everything.
I mean, I can give some comment, certainly in the European context. I think that, there was many discussions last week around, in Davos at the World Economic Forum, around spectrum and spectrum allocation, spectrum usage, both the regulated spectrum and then the unregulated spectrum, and obviously this huge amount of bandwidth which is still often held by governments in order to provide for future unknown requirements. I think there's a real move across all governments that they understand that this asset must be utilized in a different way, in a way that allows more and more people to be connected, more and more things to be connected. And we know that the speed of networks is at a level now that from a physics perspective, you will need more bandwidth. And I think the industry has done an amazing job at driving gigabit speeds over wireless, something we never thought possible through advances in technology. But I do believe the industry and businesses and governments have to look to the future to allow more spectrum and make more spectrum available.
And this is going on in the United States as well. I'm not sure if we recognize, but the television that I grew up with, it had a little ears on the top, and you spun the ears. There's not many people have those little ears anymore, but that spectrum can be redeployed to wireless, and some of those policy moves are under consideration right now in the United
We've turned those off in Europe.
Did you? We still have them in the United States.
We've turned analog television off. So.
Question?
Yes, finish correctly. I want to ask about, there was this word called virtual switch in one of your presentations.
Yes.
So can you explain what it actually means? Does it mean that actually switches are becoming software, or what does it mean?
So in my presentation, we talked about a fundamental building block of the software platform as being the Nexus 1000 virtual switch, N1K. That was the world's first virtual switch. We deployed it. It switches virtual machines, the same way physical switchings create switch connectivity between compute and the network. A virtual switch does that for a virtual machine, which typically runs in a hypervisor, like vSphere or Hyper-V or KVM, as an example. So the virtual switch that Cisco deployed, which was first instantiated inside a VMware stack, is now a standard that we see providing many, many different features in that architecture we discussed earlier. So the virtual switch continues to be developed. It provides switching services for virtual machines, the same way our physical switches provide those for physical connectivity. Together, policies that can be deployed to both of those really match the reality of today's application deployments, which will have both physical switching and virtual network services. And the Nexus 1000V is a building block of Cisco's overall software strategy.
A question about ACI, and in the press release you're saying that ACI will work also with the legacy switches, Cisco. Could you tell me how you do this? And the second question would be, will it be third-party products also?
Yep. So the question was the application-centric infrastructure that will work not only with our newer technologies, the Nexus 9000 data center switches, but also with other switches. The roadmap at announcement in November, we indicated that there will be announcing the roadmap for that deployment. That roadmap is underway right now. You will see that in further announcements that will be coming shortly. But we do have full intention of connecting the ACI and APIC controller to the full family of switches. We'll be discussing that in future announcements. Today's discussion was to take the construct of the application policy controller, the APIC, and then creating an enterprise module so we could also control wide area and access features from the same controller. That's a big thing. And today's discussion was really an extension to the APIC announcement that we made in November. The roadmap for connecting to existing data center switches is under development and will be announced at a later date.
Will you put then hardware in those switches? Or?
The roadmap for how we do that will be announced in the future.
And Rob, to the part on third parties, I actually think we're demonstrating downstairs how you can, with NetScaler in front of APIC, if you take a virtual desktop environment and you say, well, the users in the branch are not getting enough throughput. So how can we regulate quality of service? So we're actually demonstrating leveraging NetScaler to pick up those signals to then connect with APIC and then change the quality of service so the users get more throughput in the branches. So we've been working for years with Cisco on integrating to their technology, and we are now on the forefront of integrating into APIC as well.
A lot of these constructs are available in the World of Solutions, and there's a Cisco One entire solutions area where I think the further demonstrations of the capabilities that we talked about will be available for all of you, and I'd very much encourage you. I'm going there right now to see the teams and see the richness of the partner ecosystem. This is an exciting time for us at Cisco, and Chris, you talked about it in your opening, exposing much more of what we do in a simplified software platform, bridging the impact of applications to underlying infrastructure, giving our customers more value from the routers and switches they've bought from us over 30 years. I think that's an exciting time. And then working with partners in the delivery of many of the hybrid cloud models of the future that our customers want today, I think is fundamentally what this Cisco Live will be focusing on.
One more question.
Just interrupt and take Neil with us. We have another.
Yes.
Here's a question.
Just we go for 5 more minutes and then we'll close. Neil is back with us tomorrow on another panel. Thank you very much for that. We'll have an opportunity to.
Thank you, Neil.
Thank you, Neil.
Yeah.
Sorry, I've got to leave.
I think we had one there.
You talked a lot this morning about the APIC controller as SDN++.
Yes.
What happens if I, as a customer, have a heterogeneous environment with, let's say, Juniper SDN enabled switches,
Yes.
HP SDN enabled switches? Can I control them through the APIC controller, or do I use any features?
You can use Open Daylight, which is an open approach to the controller, and we have contributed the controller part to the Open Daylight Foundation. There are other underlying ways to connect, but you don't get the plus. The plus is the policy profile. The plus is the automatic chained scripting model that allows us to tie these things together. And in fact, the plus is the integration with the combination of merchant and Cisco ASICs that actually allow this to scale. I know there's connectivity methods to other switches that will be in the generic forms of SDN, but we do believe that the incremental value, telemetry, visibility, and troubleshooting that's made available by APIC, the uniqueness of deploying policy will set it aside. However, you still have an open approach and a number of open mechanisms that Cisco has fully supported.
And I think you'll see this industry evolve very much like we've seen other networking technologies evolve, where the standard can drive a certain level of functionality, but in order to get a lot of the advanced functionality, it won't be just Cisco. Cisco and a lot of vendors will add extra functionality on top, and then as the standard evolves, more and more that'll become part of the standard. But that's typically how SIP evolved and MPLS evolved and things like that, and it's very typical to what we've seen before.
Yeah, we've seen the generic SDN is going to an open development environment. We've seen the early entries of the startups that came into SDN in the last month or 6 weeks have completely changed their business model because they don't know what they're going to sell. In this model, open is open, and it's an open community is developing these technologies. And so literally, we think that open development is a great thing, but at some stage when you take the innovations that we're bringing and you embed them in the platforms, the underlying platforms for scale, performance, and security, I think that's going to be the model that works in many of the SDN use cases that customers are looking at.
So I think we have time for one more. What's the last question?
Okay, I asked this already yesterday from one person, but now I have to ask it again. We have had, in a way, online access between different automation systems and computer systems and everything for many years. So how would you explain what is so different about this Internet of everything, or so it's just we have more and more machines or more and more networks, so what is so special about
I mean,
now?
I think from my perspective, what's different about this principle of the Internet of Everything is that really computer systems historically were built around serving a user, a human. It was machine, to use a client-server environment. I think now we're moving into a world where more and more processes need to be automated for efficiency, but also because the speed of the way industry and businesses move is so very different now than it was historically. I think that the second element is that, and the best analogy that I can give is, if you go back to when, the major aircraft manufacturer, the engine manufacturer said, we are no longer going to sell an aircraft engine. They don't sell aircraft engines anymore. They provide a power service, and they provide that service for the duration of the life of a jet engine. Think about that in the context of so many major products, which historically, would be sold in the future. Manufacturers will want to provide those as a service, but they'll want to be able to understand the life, what's occurring. You're seeing it already with automobiles. If you think about it in the context of vehicles, and this was, again, something I discussed with a couple of CEOs in Davos, you think of the world of the electric car. The world of the electric car is so different to what we have seen historically, because you're not going to be able to go into a battery station and spend half an hour whilst you recharge your batteries. Everything will be replenished. You'll go in, they'll provide you a new battery pack, and you'll drive off. And then a system will have to monitor that usage. They'll have to charge that usage. Those infrastructures are just not there today, but they have to be there in the future. And I think the principle of how products and services are delivered is just one example of how this Internet of Everything will mean very different processes that are utilizing IT than maybe historically. And then we already see that the cities we mentioned, the cities of Barcelona and Nice, they're just two examples. Cities in China, cities in India, cities in South America are looking at how they use technology, sensor-based technologies, to really drive a more efficient use of the existing resources that a city has, which are underutilized or they're utilized poorly. And I think that's the principle that is going to change, and the concepts, therefore, that you will start to see emerge, will look at IT in a very, very different way than they have done historically. That's my interpretation of what we will see from a business perspective going forward.
Yeah, one other thing on the technology side, Chris, that I would add to that is if you think of the 13 billion devices we have connected today, most of them have some form of computer. Set-top box providing functionality for the connected televisions, your iPhone or your tablet, and its mobile
TVs, game consoles, everything.
So most of them have computing in them and increasingly a lot of storage. So my cloud, my DVR stores my recorded shows. The Internet of Things will include many sensors and devices that have no compute, no storage. The network will need to be part of that distributed compute, storage, and programming system. So a sensor that we'll be deploying on some form of process or tag that probably sells for $1, that would be less than 62 euro today, cents, yeah. Right? That won't have a computer. So it will come up with trillions of events, will be registered. The network will then need to be a distributed form of data center. That event isn't going to go back to a data center. It's going to just stay at the very edge of the network. You're going to have some software that says, oh, something different has happened, the temperature's changed, the vibration has changed, the condition has changed. Then you send that event to the data center for some other programmable activity. That's a fundamental change to the architecture of networks today, which are 3 tiers: access, an aggregation and distribution layer, and a core. When you look at my Fitbit has sensors and some memory in it. It sensed my steps, my sleep, my body signals, and then it only uploaded those when it syncs to my iPad where the application resides. There'll be many, many other places where the network will be the first place where devices sync, and that will be an evolution of the network architecture that will exist that will occur over the next 5 to 10 years. So lots of exciting innovations ahead.
certainly lots of exciting things to come. So on behalf of Klaus.
Just a comment on that. We are making another announcement later today in the U.S. in a conference called Distributed, exactly targeted at the IoT deployment. And we are going to talk about the three-layer architecture that Rob just described and talk about the fog, which is the layer between the aggregation and the cloud. So if you're interested in that area, we are going to make the announcement in 12 hours or so. It is right.
You can go around the clock and just stay with us, and we'll just keep announcing things.
The show goes on.
Midnight.
Yeah. So, and for those who don't know, that's in bar. Lots of Rob from Cisco in the back.
Yes.
So just ask her more about the fog.
But no tweeting for 12 hours, right? So.
Yeah. Anyways, on behalf of Klaus, Chris, and Rob, I'm Zeus Kerrevala. I want to thank you all for attending this session. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Zeus. Thanks.
Thank you.